Hey y'all, it is Ken, and we are climbing the Labyrinth. It is actually Ash Wednesday today. I think it might actually be above zero here in South Dakota for the first time in a number of days. And I'd actually planned on doing two other podcasts before this one, but this one just kind of came and fell in my lap, and I'm going to try and get it done real quick. But for those of you that have been waiting for the one on the ARC document, I got that all ready to go. I just need to put some finishing touches on it and then get it uploaded and finished. So that one is coming soon. I had intended to do a podcast today on just kind of Lenten devotional thing of starting with Ash Wednesday, which maybe I will get out tomorrow if I can get that recorded. But just a good start to the season of Lent and as we look forward to Easter. But today, we get to deal with a little more RCA stuff. And I know some of you that are in the RCA, this is pretty pertinent info. And for some of you that aren't, it's just kind of extra stuff. But this is, I got an email today from the director of communication for the RCA, because she speaks for the RCA, apparently. Not just in communicating things, but telling you things, like giving you not just information and resources. It's supposed to be, we'll look at it, it says news and resources, but it's more than just news and resources. It's also what I would consider a bit of propaganda. And yes, that's a harsh word, but it is true. So we're going to look at that in a second, and then we're going to look at a Zoom call that the RCA put on their Facebook page that I was really excited about. And so number one is an email that goes out about Ash Wednesday today, and number two is a Zoom call about evangelism that is on the RCA Facebook page that has some moments where you go, not what I was expecting to hear. So let's jump in. Here's a screenshot. Let me zoom in a little bit. You can see at the very top here, if you can even see it at all, the top says news and resources. So this comes into my inbox and whoever else is in the RCA crew's inbox, and it says news and resources. Well, you should consider this not just news, but more like an op-ed sort of news. And it starts out, friends, today is Ash Wednesday. Awesome. As if we hadn't had enough vulnerability lately, Ash Wednesday puts it all out there. You are dust, and to dust you shall return. A quote from Genesis 3. Yes, totally on board with that. Lent is a season of preparing for Christ's death, but also a reckoning of our own, with our own. We've already been living with the uncomfortable awareness of our own mortality, not morality, mortality. And we've deeply altered the patterns of our lives to minimize pandemic health risks to ourselves and to others. So acknowledging that things are a little different for us. We've lost friends and family members whose absence still catches us off guard with longing and grief. Yep, okay. And then all of a sudden things change. Many of us who are white have been waking up to racial injustice. Excuse me? Many of us who are white are waking up to racial injustice, which is all too familiar to our brothers and sisters of color, and the ways that the church has been a part of that injustice. So let's just pull that out right there. Many of us who are white are suddenly waking up to racial injustice. Statistically, we are the most just time in our nation for any race. Where is this coming from? This is creating a false divide so that we have struggle. And within struggle, then you create classes of people that are the ones that are the haves and the have-nots all over again. This is ridiculous. Ash Wednesday is not about whether you're white and you are acknowledging that there is injustice in the world or whether you're a person of color. It's about being a person created in the image of God and acknowledging that every single one of us is dust. Not that some of us are white dust and brown dust and yellow dust and black dust, but that every single one of us is dust. She does not acknowledge that. That there are some of us that are white and we need to wake up to racial injustice. And the point of this, I think, is that, and those of you that don't believe there's racial injustice, you're not really awoken yet. Woken. That even the next line is what we've talked about previously with the Reverend Dr. Denise Kingdom Greer. Jesus has a thing about titles, but apparently that doesn't matter. The ways that the church has been part of that injustice. So now we're waking up. Ash Wednesday reminds us that, white people have it better than anybody else, which is sometimes true and sometimes not true. The people with the most money in the United States is actually Asian people. That they are the ones that actually get penalized most when it comes to things with financial institutions, things with academic institutions. They are the ones that are actually getting like a reverse racism against them. And many that are in the group of the majority of white folks are not necessarily uber rich. They're not necessarily privileged like you would want people to believe. But what this wants to propagate is the idea that there are oppressed people and there are oppressors of people. This is old school. I mean, this is Hegelian logic from way back, a dialectical logic from philosophy. Most of you may have no idea what I'm talking about, but a guy named Hegel, he came out and said that you have a thesis, a thing that you think, and then you have a antithesis, the thing that is against that, and then eventually you get the synthesis, something that moves beyond. So you have one thing that has an opposite, and then between the two things in the dialectic, you get something more, which on the outset go, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense, which Karl Marx eventually took within the USSR and said, no, you have the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. You have the haves and the have-nots. And what we need to do is make everything on an equal field. Not that there is equality, but there is equity within all of us. So it's not just that we each have an opportunity to have things. Suddenly, or in this case, it's not that we all have the opportunity to be racist or the opportunity to be privileged, but now it's because of being a part of a group of the oppressor or the oppressed, you are now signified within that. Based on your skin color, you are now oppressed or you are now an oppressor, regardless of what you have ever done. And the church is a part of that injustice. No, that's not true. That is not what Ash Wednesday is about at all. You keep going here. And then there's the uncertainty in our denomination as we await the decisions of the Vision 2020 team report. Okay, the report has already been out, and they've given us 3 options that all 3 will very likely not pass. So let's just keep going. Not only are we facing our own mortality this year, we're facing the mortality of the covenant relationships at the heart of our denomination. So we are facing the mortality and the breaking of covenant relationships, which is pointed towards the people that don't agree with what's going on in the RCA. So conservative folks that say, no, you began to break that covenant relationship when you started doing things and living in a way that was outside of how we said that we live as Bible-believing Reformed Christians. But now what this is saying is, oh no, you are in the wrong. This is shame on you. This is shaming you into thinking that if you're thinking that you want to leave the denomination, you're breaking a covenant relationship. It is exactly the opposite of the reality. It'll be months before General Synod votes on the report's recommendations, but you probably already have friends who are planning to leave the denomination. Let's just pause and back up here. We started with we are facing, we will, and now it'll be months until the recommendations, but you probably already have friends who are planning to leave the denomination. And you probably already have friends who will stay. But the people that are going to stay are really wondering what the RCA will look like when the dust settles. I think everybody's wondering that. Everybody in the RCA is wondering what it would look like in the end for the people that are going to something new and for the people that stick around. This, like much else right now, is heavy. It's heavy for those of us who will stay. It's heavy for those who will go. It's heavy for those who are waiting to see the results of synod's discernment. So it's heavy for the people in limbo. It's heavy for the people that are committed to stay no matter what. And it's heavy for the people. Okay, yeah, to a degree, but sometimes it's also freeing. It is liberating. That suddenly you're not fighting over things like being told that because you're white, you're an oppressor. That would be freeing for me. Let's go a little further. The ripples will touch our congregations, our call, our relationships in ways that are still unknown. Yes, absolutely. And here comes Ash Wednesday. You are dust, and to dust you shall return. And then she quotes some pastor that offered some things, and I'm going to jump down past the quote to the next part where she's writing. That incontrovertible reminder is the gift of Ash Wednesday. This uncomfortable waiting, this waiting space is an honest place to share our stories, even while the end of that story is still unknown. Certainly, the RCA is in this waiting space. Some dear friends have already declared the RCA dead. So if the people that want to go to uphold some doctrinal purity, they think that it's dead, or they think that people have left and that there's no way to reconcile. And it's more, here's where she goes. Some friends have already declared that the RCA is dead, but it's more of a Holy Saturday situation. That time between Good Friday and Easter Sunday, the seed buried deep in the ground, the liminal space of relinquishment of faith. So the people that just wait it out and wait for the faith of the next thing to come, she's comparing the denomination right now to Jesus in the tomb. Like, in some ways, I can kind of grasp that, but at the same time, She's saying all of you that have said that the RCA is dead or you don't want to be a part of the RCA, well, you're going to miss out on Easter. You're going to miss out on the good stuff. How do we share our stories when the end is not yet known? We follow a God who makes all things new. So we share them bravely. We share them with hope. And by sharing, we invite other people into our hope, into our faith, as we submit ourselves to God's Spirit and the Spirit's work of making all things new. Okay, now that stuff isn't bad right there. But what it is emphasizing is there is a story to be told. And it's not Jesus' story. It's my story, your story, and the story of the oppressed people and you being an oppressor. And that if you think the RCA is going down a path or has been going down a path for a number of years now, and you're just sick of that already, and you're ready to actually get to church mission work, and you're sick of giving money to a denomination that pays a person like this to put this garbage out, then suddenly you're the bad person. Well, I'm not just going to sit here and take that anymore. This is a time to actually stand up and say, no, that's not okay. You are the director of communication for the RCA, and you are saying things that I guarantee you is not the majority opinion within the RCA. Okay, you can go online and read that for yourself if you don't agree with me. It's very savvy in the way that they shape things. It's very interesting in the way that words are used. That's the postmodern thing is words control meaning, and once you have the meaning, then suddenly you can get people to do and say things that they wouldn't normally do. Once you convince everybody that they're the bad people and you're the good people, or that you've signaled your virtue by saying, well, I was bad, but now I'm not anymore. The hardest part in this, she begins by equating all of those things to Ash Wednesday. When Ash Wednesday is the level playing field that says, before God, you're nothing. God took Adamah, the dirt of the ground, and spoke life, and Adam was. From the dirt of the ground came life because God made it so, and back to it you will go because of your sin, Adam. Back to it we will go because of Adam and Eve's sin. And what she is saying is it's not about all of us having a commonality in the dirt. It's not the dust of Ash Wednesday. It's not the ashes. It's whether you're this color ash or that color ash that suddenly makes you a little bit better or a little bit worse. That's not gospel. That's not what Jesus is about. Okay, enough of that. Let's go to this evangelism thing on Zoom. So I'm going to bring it up on my screen here. Hopefully you can see it. I don't know that I can zoom in a whole lot here. I'll zoom in so you can see some of it. And then hopefully the audio comes through because I'm not running it back into the audio interface stuff. So I'm just going to play it and hopefully it sounds all right. If not, then we'll see you next week. But if it does sound all right, then we'll talk through some of these things. So here we go. This is an RCA Zoom chat about evangelism, and I'm coming in about 25 minutes in is where suddenly things got a little goofy for me. And it starts out really good. So I'm going to press play, and then I'll give a little comment in a minute.
Jesus' mission message, as it comes out of the 4th chapter of Luke, when he stands up in that synagogue and he reads from the Haftorah, he reads from Isaiah, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he's anointed me to bring glad tidings to the poor, sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, and to proclaim a year acceptable to the Lord." That's rooted right in Isaiah 61, which is entitled "The Mission to the Afflicted." And my great fear is that we don't...
Pause. So she starts out with Jesus' message in Luke, where he goes to the synagogue. I'm actually going to preach on this tonight at Ash Wednesday, and we'll give a bit of an Ash Wednesday devotional maybe tomorrow on this same topic. So this is the part that grabbed me. So she's talking about Jesus in the synagogue, who then reads from the scroll of Isaiah and shares about he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor, and then she goes on. But let's just keep following along.
Fully that mission of Jesus. In order for us to fully reflect who Jesus is, how Jesus lived, why Jesus died, and how Jesus died, is to embrace his proclamation, his own proclamation that describes what his ministry is about. And I think that comes to me as a white person in ministry.
Here it comes.
That I grew up learning that sin is a very personal thing and an individual thing. And it took me a long time to understand that the great evil of our world, and our world is a battle between the righteousness of God and the evil of this world, that sin can be systemic, and that sin can be corporate, and that we can live in sin and not see our sin.
Okay, pause. So the great injustice is not sin, objective, the grand thing that really is the objective, overarching struggle, battle, the thing that Jesus took upon himself and became sin. She's saying that she grew up thinking sin was just about the things she did individually, which, yeah, I can follow along with that because there is that part, and sometimes we lose sight of the greater picture. And then she moves into that the great injustice is that sin is something that is systemic. Now, the Old Testament talks often about corporate sin, and it also talks about more of a systematic style sin of things that people do to keep other people down, people that are oppressed. But systemic is different. It means that it's there no matter what. Like, she's really taking the idea that we all live in sin, the objective, the thing that is really total depravity, the thing that is a tenet of the Reformed faith, that we all suffer from the affliction of sin, and she's suddenly giving it a laser focus that some people perpetuate that way more than others. Now, to a degree, the hard part about this is that part of it is true. Part of it is being used as a blunt and club so that some people are the bad people and other people aren't. Let's listen a little bit longer so that we can see what she means by this sin. It gets interesting.
What scares me, that's the fear. That if we stay in an individual understanding of sin, we never grasp the reality. As a white person and how I grew up, everything looks fine to me. Everything looks fine to me growing up I didn't see other people suffering. When I took on my work at Project Hospitality, and the majority of our work, almost the entirety of our work, are in communities of color here in Staten Island and New York City, I enter into a world where African American Christians suffer under the sin that white Christians have perpetuated by seeing the world as okay and not realizing how our foot is on somebody else's neck. Something that became very literal in the death of George Floyd, and for us on Staten Island in the death of Eric Garner, just 3 blocks from where I live. But that people live with that people live with that oppression and come to see the hope and salvation of God in Jesus by living out that oppression and seeking justice and righteousness and the wholeness. And we miss that. We struggle with not acknowledging racism as sin.
We're going to pause here. So she's saying that white people that don't acknowledge something else as a systemic sin, maybe because you didn't know, but what I think she's getting at here is that you perpetuate sin by not calling sin sin. Okay, on a biblical standpoint, absolutely. But from a practical standpoint of somebody that has not experienced that or is not around it or did not contribute to it, suddenly this goes right back to that critical race theory stuff that we were talking about earlier that was in that email. This goes right back to, because you're white and you don't acknowledge some sort of racism and systemic sin, then suddenly you are perpetuating that. Maybe you have no idea that that's going on. Okay, let's listen to what she names as sin here. So racism is sin, yes, agreeable. Xenophobia, that xenophobia is sin. Who decides what xenophobia is? The fear of immigrants. Okay, so does that mean the ability to have borders is not okay? Does that mean that you shouldn't have locks on your doors? I'm not sure where this all goes. Okay, let's hear a few more.
Misogyny is sin.
Misogyny.
Sexism is sin.
Heterosexism. Heterosexism is sin. So now she's naming her sin, the things that are systemic in here. And so it's being white, it's being against any sort of xenophobia. So anytime that you're against anybody having some sort of border or saying that this is my stuff and not your stuff, that's not okay. That heterosexism is sin. I thought that was in the Bible. That is a very stark contrast between the East Coast and a large portion of the RCA. Heterosexism is sin. So it is sin for you to say that God created marriage to be between a man and a woman. We have now entered into an interesting place. I'll let her finish a second, and then I'll just recap a little bit here.
As sin. And if we don't get that, we're never going to be able to shape the world that will be ready for his return.
If we don't acknowledge sin, the things that she said, that is using systems of oppression and liberation theology and not biblical theology that comes from the gospel-centered life, if we don't do that, then we're never going to be able to change the world, because the change that she's looking for is that everybody then admits that if you are a heterosexual person, that you are sinful by being that way and not allowing any sort of homosexual relationships or bisexual relationships or what have you, that suddenly the things that God said was normative is not okay anymore. Those things are sinful. And then the other part I want to acknowledge, I'm not going to go through all of this, is the person that's in charge of this chat nods along. The person employed by the RCA goes, yep, Laura Osborne, yep. Oh, there's some big topics in there, a lot to discuss, is what she says eventually. She does not come out and say, well, that is your opinion, but some don't believe all of those things are sin. She doesn't say any of those things. She nods along and agrees, which tells me That the struggle that we have within the RCA is that many within the denominational office, the people that send out emails, the people that are a part of the discipleship movement, and here even the evangelism side, have bought into a lie. The same lie that you read in that email earlier. They are ascribing to critical theory stuff. They are not ascribing to the gospel. They are putting people into boxes and categories rather than saying from the dust to the dust, that all of us have an even level field within the front of the cross. As we stand before Jesus, all condemned, all sin, all fall short of the glory. What they're saying is some are worse than others. Especially if you're white, especially if you're heterosexual, especially if you're male, especially if you're approving of borders, especially if the list goes on. Now, here's the struggle that I have. Nobody within the RCA is sending out information that says that's not how we all believe. Because they want everybody in the RCA to believe that that's how you should think. That's what you should believe. That's what the norm is. And the reality is most within the RCA do not believe that. Many do, but most do not. That there is a strong, silent majority of Midwestern white folks that go, I don't know that I feel okay about being told that I'm a bad person when I haven't done anything bad. The RCA wants you to believe that you are complicit, that the church is a part of systemic injustice, and just by being you are bad. Rather than saying, hey, we're all in a bad spot. Let's work at ending racism. Let's work at ending injustice. Let's work at ending oppression. Let's work at trying to find victory over sin in our everyday lives. Let's work at acknowledging the lordship of Jesus within our lives. What they want you to do is realize that that stuff is okay. That gospel-centered life is okay. But what you really need is this extra layer, this little something else, this acknowledgement that you are a really bad person to somebody else, even though you didn't do anything to them. That's not the gospel. When Paul talks about there's no more slave, there's no more free, there's no more Greek, there's no more Jew, no more Gentile, no more male, no more female. I don't know that he said the male-female part. I'm misquoting it, I think. But he goes through the dichotomy of all these things. He doesn't say that there's no more of those things because the more oppressive person laid down their privilege to do something else. He's saying that in the light of Christ, you are a new creation. That in the light of Christ, that sin has been defeated. That you live into that, and you don't continually acknowledge that you are an oppressive, bad person. Okay, this took way longer than I thought. I was hoping for like 10 to 15 minutes, not 30 minutes. That is Ash Wednesday from the RCA. Maybe I can get this out yet today. But yeah. Stay tuned. I will try to get more of the ARC documentation up soon, and then hopefully a Lenten devotional from Luke 4 and Isaiah 61. Till next time.